Susanoo explained, "The storm god who slayed a serpent to atone for his sins." We are often given simple archetypes: the wise king, the noble warrior, the trickster, the villain. But the truth of the divine is rarely so clear. What if the same God whose tempestuous rage could shake the heavens was the only one capable of slaying the nightmares that plagued the earth? This is the story of a God born of tears, a being of untamable power, whose very nature was the storm itself. He was a god of chaos in a world of serene order, a force of destruction in a pantheon of creators. For his sins he was cast out, exiled from the heavens, and left to wander the mortal world alone. But it is in that exile, in that humiliation, that he found a new purpose. This is not just a tale of a god's rage. It is a tale of his redemption. Welcome to Mythos Unveiled. Today we journey to the ancient land of Japan, to the high celestial plain and the reed-choked rivers of the mortal world, to explain the story of Susanoo, the storm god who was cast down as a villain, only to rise again as a legendary hero. In the beginning of the world, after the heavens and the earth had been separated from the primordial chaos, the first great gods, Izanagi and his sister wife Izanami, stood upon the floating bridge of heaven. With a jeweled spear, they churned the ocean below, and from the brine that dripped from the spear's tip, the first island of the Japanese archipelago was formed. They descended to this island and, through their divine union, gave birth to the lands, the mountains, the rivers, and the myriad gods, the kami, who would inhabit them. But this act of creation was marred by tragedy. In giving birth to the fire god, Kagutsuchi, Izanami was horribly burned and descended to Yomi, the land of the dead. Izanagi, consumed by grief, followed her, hoping to bring her back. But he broke a sacred taboo by looking upon her decaying form, and was forced to flee in terror from his now monstrous wife and the legions of the underworld. He returned to the world of the living, stained by the pollution of death. To purify himself, he went to a river and began to wash. And as he washed, new, powerful gods were born from his cleansing. From the washing of his left eye, the most radiant of all kami emerged. Amaterasu Amakami, the great goddess of the sun, destined to rule the heavens. From the washing of his right eye came Tsukuyumi no Mikoto, the god of the moon, given dominion over the night. And then, as Izanagi washed his nose, a final, powerful, and deeply problematic god was born. He was Susanoo no Mikoto. He was not radiant like his sister, nor calm and watchful like his brother. He was born from his father's grief-filled breath, and he was chaos incarnate. He was the raging wind, the howling storm, the untamed fury of the ocean's wrath. His power was boundless, his spirit untamable, and from the moment of his birth, his weeping and wailing were so loud that it shook the mountains and made the rivers roar. Izanagi, having now created his 3 most noble children, divided his kingdom amongst them. Amaterasu, he decreed, you shall rule the high celestial plain, Takamagara. Tsukuyumi, he commanded, you shall rule the dominion of the night. And to his tempestuous son he said, Susanoo, you shall rule the sea. But Susanoo did not want the sea. He did not want to rule. He only wanted his mother. He continued to weep and rage, neglecting his duties, his storms destroying the forests and causing the mountains to wither. His eternal tantrum was a blight upon the new world. Izanagi, his patience finally exhausted by his son's destructive grief, banished him. You are not fit to rule, the great creator god declared. You shall be cast out. Go to the land of your mother, to the root land, Nenokuni. Susanoo, for a moment, seemed to accept his fate. But before he departed for his exile, he declared that he wished to say a final farewell to his sister, Amaterasu, in her heavenly kingdom. His journey to Takamagara, however, was not a peaceful one. As he ascended, the earth quaked, the winds howled, and the very heavens trembled with the force of his chaotic passage. Amaterasu saw him coming. She did not see a brother coming to say goodbye. She saw a warrior coming to conquer. She armed herself, tying her hair into knots, slinging 1,000-arrow quiver to her back, and holding her mighty bow, ready to defend her domain. "Why have you come?" she demanded as he reached the gates of her kingdom, her voice as sharp and clear as the light she commanded. Susanoo, in a rare moment of calm, insisted he had no ill intent. He had only come to bid her farewell before his exile. Amaterasu was suspicious. To prove his sincerity, Susanoo proposed a trial by pledge, and Yuki. Each of them would take an object belonging to the other, chew it and spit it out. The nature of the gods born from their breath would determine who had the purer intentions. Amaterasu took Susanoo's great 10-spin sword, broke it into 3 pieces, chewed them, and from her breath, 3 beautiful goddesses were born. Then, Susanoo took Amaterasu's string of 500 sacred jewels, crushed them with his teeth, and from his breath, 5 fierce and powerful male gods were born. "The goddesses are born from my sword," Susanoo declared triumphantly. "Therefore they are mine. My intentions are pure. I have won." Amaterasu, seeing the noble male gods born from her jewels, accepted his victory, if only to keep the peace. She allowed her brother into her celestial kingdom. It was a mistake. His victory went to his head. Freed from the threat of immediate conflict, Susanoo's chaotic nature erupted in full force. He celebrated his victory with a series of destructive, terrifying, and deeply insulting acts. He broke down the divisions between his sister's sacred rice paddies, letting the water flood and destroy the precious crop. He flayed a piebald colt of heaven, a sacred animal, and, in his most heinous act, he threw its bloody carcass through the roof of his sister's sacred weaving hall, where she and her attendants were weaving the garments of the gods. One of her attendants, in her shock and terror, was struck by the weaver's shuttle and died. This was the final straw. It was an act of desecration and violence that could not be forgiven. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, was so overcome with grief, shame, and fear of her brother's uncontrollable rage that she fled. She hid herself away in the Amano Awato, the heavenly rock cave, and sealed the entrance behind her with a great boulder. And with the sun goddess gone, the world was plunged into an absolute, unending darkness. The high celestial plane was silenced. The world of men was filled with the evil cries of 1,000 malevolent spirits who thrived in the gloom. The order of the universe was on the brink of collapse. The 8 million gods of heaven gathered in a panic on the banks of the tranquil river of heaven. They tried to plead with Amaterasu, but she would not listen. They needed a plan, and so the god of wisdom, Omoikane, devised a brilliant one. They gathered the long-singing birds of eternal night and had them sing. They forged a great mirror, the Yata no Kagami. They found a string of 500 beautiful jewels, the Yasakani no Magatama. And then, they called upon the goddess of mirth and dawn, Aim no Yuzum. Yuzum overturned a washtub, stomped upon it until it boomed like a great drum, and began to dance. Her dance was wild, unrestrained, and deeply comedic. She disrobed, and the 8 million gods, watching her ridiculous and joyful performance, burst into a thunderous, heaven-shaking roar of laughter. Amaterasu, deep in her cave, heard the celebration. She was perplexed. She had plunged the world into darkness, yet the gods were celebrating. Her curiosity piqued. She cracked open the stone door of her cave just a little. "How can you laugh?" she called out. When the world is without my light, Uzum replied, we have found a goddess more beautiful and radiant than you. And as she spoke, the other gods held up the great, shining mirror. Amaterasu, seeing her own brilliant reflection for the first time, was so captivated that she stepped out of the cave to get a better look. In that instant, the incredibly strong god Amenotajikareo, who had been hiding beside the cave, leaped forward and sealed the entrance behind her. The light had returned. The world was saved. But now there was the matter of justice. The gods convened. Their judgment on Susanoo was swift and absolute. For his crimes he was to be truly and finally banished. They imposed upon him a great fine. They pulled out his beard and the nails of his hands and feet as a sign of his purification and humiliation, and they cast him down from the heavens, an exile in truth. His descent was a violent storm that tore through the sky. He was no longer a god of heaven, but a disgraced and forgotten spirit, left to wander the mortal realm of Ashihara no Nakatsukuni, the central land of reed plains. When the dust of his fall settled, there was silence. No divine halls, no celestial gates, only the earth, the sky, and the immense, crushing weight of his lonely exile. He had been a prince of heaven, and now he was nothing. His journey of redemption was about to begin. Susanoo wandered the mortal world, his divine power undiminished but his purpose lost. What was a god without a throne? What was a storm without a sky to rage in? The mortal realm stretched endlessly before him, a world of rivers carving through valleys, of great mountains standing like silent, judgmental watchers. But something was wrong. The land was wounded, felt sick. He journeyed until he came to the province of Izumo, near the headwaters of the river Hai. There he saw a pair of chopsticks floating downstream. He knew there must be people nearby. He followed the river and soon found an old man and an old woman, weeping bitterly. Between them sat a young, beautiful maiden, whom they clutched as if to protect her from the world itself. Susanoo, his own heart still heavy with his own form of grief, approached them. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice the rumble of a distant storm. "And why do you weep so?" The old man looked up, his face a mask of sorrow. "I am an earthly deity, a child of the mountain gods. My name is Ashinazuchi, and this is my wife, Tenazuchi. And this," he said, his voice breaking, "is our daughter, Kushinadaheim. We weep," the old woman continued, her voice trembling, "because of a great and terrible beast, the Yamata no Orochi, the eight-forked serpent of Koshi. It comes to our lands once each year. We once had 8 daughters, as beautiful as the rising sun. For 7 years the serpent has come, and for 7 years it has demanded one of them as a sacrifice. Now only our youngest, Kushinadaheim, remains, and soon the time of its coming will be upon us." Susanoo listened to their tale, and for the first time since his fall from heaven, the storm inside him stirred. But it was not with his old, selfish rage. It was with something colder, sharper. Not pity, a challenge. He looked at the weeping parents. He looked at the beautiful, terrified girl who stood so bravely, accepting her fate. And he looked towards the mountains, towards the dark lands of Koshi, from where this ancient terror would come. The villagers spoke the name of the beast in hushed, fearful voices, a whisper that carried the weight of death itself. Orochi. It was not just a beast, not just a demon. It was a force of nature, a living calamity. They described it to him. It was a horror almost too great to comprehend. Its body was so immense that it stretched across 8 valleys and 8 hills. Upon its back grew moss and great trees. Its belly was perpetually stained with blood, and from its single vast body grew 8 heads and 8 tails, each one massive, each head crowned with jagged horns, each pair of eyes burning with the cold red light of endless hunger. It did not kill for survival. It did not consume out of need. It devoured. It was a terror as ancient as the land itself, a being that had no equal. Susanoo gripped the hilt of his 10-span sword. The wind shifted around him, carrying the faint, metallic scent of decay, of something watching from the darkness beyond the hills. He was no longer a god among gods. He was a disgraced exile. But perhaps here, in this wounded land, there was still a place for a storm. Perhaps, in the ruins of his exile, a new legend could be born. "If I slay this beast," Susanoo said, his voice calm and steady, "will you give me your daughter to be my wife?" The old couple, stunned by his sudden, powerful presence, looked at him with a mixture of terror and a fragile, desperate hope. "We do not even know your name, August One," the father stammered. "I am Susanoo no Mikoto," he declared, "the younger brother of the great sun goddess, Amaterasu. I have but newly descended from the heavens." The old deities were overcome with awe. They bowed low before him. "If you are truly that great god," they said, "then our daughter is yours to command. We offer her to you with the utmost reverence." Susanoo did not charge into battle like a reckless warrior. He did not seek out the Yamato no Orochi with blind fury, nor did he believe that his divine strength alone could slay a beast that had reigned unchecked for centuries. He had been the storm, and he knew that the greatest tempests are not conquered by force, but by understanding and outwitting them. The Orochi was not just a monster. It was a creature of habit, bound to a pattern so old, so deeply ingrained, that it had never even considered another way. It demanded blood. It was given blood. It had never been denied. And that was its greatest weakness. For a storm that never faces resistance will never prepare for the one day it might come. Susanoo would be that storm. He turned to the old couple. "You will brew a special kind of sake," he instructed. "A liquor refined 8 times over. It must be a divine drink, a spirit of such potency that even a monster will not be able to resist its allure." Next, he commanded them to build a great round fence, with 8 gates set into it. At each gate they were to build a platform, and upon each platform they were to place a great vat filled with the 8-fold refined sake. The final step of his plan required something even more delicate, something magical. He turned to the maiden, Kushinadaheim, and met her brave, terrified gaze with a solemn intensity. "I must hide you," he said. "The serpent expects to find you. If it does not, it may hesitate. And its hesitation is all the time I will need." The girl swallowed hard, but her voice was steady. "How?" His fingers brushed against her hair. The wind swirled around them as his divine energy sparked in the air. "You will not disappear," he murmured, "but you will become something no beast would think to seek." Her form shimmered, her body twisted, not in pain, but in a miraculous, divine transformation. And then, where the beautiful maiden had stood, there was now only a simple, multi-toothed comb. With great, reverent care, he took the comb and placed it securely within the thick, dark hair of his own topknot. Kushinadaheim was now hidden and safe. And now the storm was ready. The trap was built not on strength, but on the serpent's own arrogance and greed. The villagers withdrew to a safe distance. The night stretched long and silent. Then, at last, the ground began to tremble. The trees swayed as if in a great wind, though the air was still. The air grew heavy, thick with the stench of old blood and decay. And in the distance, moving with the slow, patient, and terrible inevitability of a glacier, the serpent came. The earth trembled beneath its immense weight. The trees bent and snapped as it moved. The rivers slowed as if holding their breath. The Yamato no Orochi had arrived. Its 8 heads, each the size of a small hill, stretched toward the sky, twisting, writhing, their forked tongues tasting the air, their 16 malevolent, glowing red eyes scanning the land for their promised meal. The scent of the 8-fold refined sake filled its senses. Paused. For the first time in centuries, the beast did not find a weeping father or a trembling, sacrificial daughter waiting before it. There was no offering, no sacrifice, only the 8 gates, the 8 platforms, and the intoxicating, irresistible scent of the divine liquor. Greed and thirst overwhelmed its ancient instinct. It did not take long for the first head to lower its massive jaws, parting as it plunged its snout into the first vat, swallowing the potent drink in a single gluttonous gulp. Then another head drank from another vat, and another and another. Each of the 8 heads drank deeply, greedily, their ancient hunger for flesh momentarily forgotten in their new hunger for the divine spirit. The potent liquid burned down their 8 throats, thick and heavy, seeping into their monstrous veins. The serpent's vast, coiled bodies began to slow. The monstrous eyes that once gleamed with endless, predatory hunger began to dull and glaze over. The great heads sagged. Their massive limbs faltered. The air grew thick with the heavy, drunken breathing of a beast intoxicated on its own arrogance. It slumped to the ground, its 8 heads lolling, and fell into a deep, drunken slumber. And then, in the perfect, heavy silence that followed, Susanoo struck. The storm, held in check for so long, unleashed itself. He did not wait for the first head to rise. He did not give the beast a single moment to understand the trap it had so willingly walked into. He drew his 10-span sword, a blade that had once belonged to the heavens, and it flashed in the moonlight. With a single, powerful, and divine strike, the first head of the serpent fell. The night erupted with a deafening, gurgling roar. The beast, even in its drunken stupor, thrashed in agony, its 7 remaining heads snapping wildly, their sluggish minds struggling to comprehend the source of this sudden, terrible pain. But Susanoo did not stop. The storm was now at its peak, a force of nature that could not be contained. Lightning, born of his own divine fury, cracked across the sky. Winds howled through the valley, and the god of tempests moved like a phantom of vengeance. Another head fell. The Orochi convulsed. Venomous fangs snapped at the empty air, desperate to retaliate. The ground trembled beneath its death throes, great trees shattering as its 8 tails lashed through the air. It was a god's battle, a clash that would carve itself into the very memory of the land. But for all its might, for all its ancient terror, the Orochi had already lost. The sake had robbed it of its speed. Its strength was failing. Its movements, once precise and predatory, were now wild, desperate, and fatally slow. And Susanoo was faster. Another head fell, then another, and another. Blood, black in the moonlight, flooded the earth, staining the soil, seeping into the rivers, turning them red. The beast screamed, its 7, then 6, then 5 voices splitting the heavens. Yet for all its fury, it could not stop the storm. The battle was nearly over. The 8th and final head swayed, barely holding itself upright. Its eyes glazed with a mixture of drunken confusion, fury, and for the first time in its ancient existence, fear. The immense weight of its 7 severed kin surrounded it, their lifeless forms sinking into the blood-soaked earth. Susanoo stood before it, his own form spattered with the creature's dark blood, his sword gleaming. He had not stopped moving, not once. His breaths were steady. His gaze was as cold and as sharp as a winter wind. This was the moment his exile became a legend. With one final, powerful step, he raised his blade. The last head fell. The Yamato no Orochi, the beast that had ruled Izumo in terror, that had devoured daughters without end, that had never known fear, was no more. The silence that followed was absolute and unbearable. And then, as if the world itself had been holding its breath, the winds exhaled, the trees swayed gently, the rivers moved once more. The storm was calm, but as Susanoo stood amidst the carnage, preparing to clean his blade, he noticed something. He began to cut the great body into pieces, and when he reached the middle of the serpent's fourth tail, the blade of his own sacred sword struck something hard. Chipped, puzzled, he cut away the flesh of the tail to see what lay within. And something glimmered in the remains. Amid the gore, within the mighty coils of the beast's final tail, something shone with a divine, otherworldly light. Susanoo's eyes narrowed. He stepped forward, his fingers brushing against cold, unyielding, and perfect metal. Hidden deep within the Orochi's flesh, he pulled, and from the body of the fallen serpent, a magnificent sword emerged. A blade unlike any other he had ever seen, forged not by mortals, not even by the master smiths of the gods, but by some unknown cosmic process. It was the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, one of the 3 future imperial regalia of Japan. He had not just slain a monster, he had uncovered a miracle. The battlefield was silent, a gruesome tableau of divine victory. The nightmare that had devoured this land for generations lay still, its massive body now nothing more than lifeless flesh and severed heads. But Susanoo did not look at the fallen beast. His gaze was fixed on the thing he had pulled from its body, the sacred blade that should not have been there. It gleamed, even in the blood-soaked night, untouched by the filth of battle. He turned it in his hands, feeling the weight of something far older and more significant than even he could comprehend. He held the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, a blade not forged by man or god, but by fate itself. The villagers had watched the battle from the safety of the distant hills, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. None had dared approach as the storm god fought the beast that had ruled them for so long. But now, as the air settled, as the last echoes of the Orochi's final cry faded into the mountains, they began to emerge. Their steps were hesitant, their voices hushed. Could it be real? Had the monster truly fallen? Their gazes shifted between the immense, butchered carcass of the beast and the lone, blood-spattered god who had slain it. And then, one by one, they fell to their knees. A god had come to them in their darkest hour, and he had won. Susanoo did not bask in their gratitude. He turned away from the fallen serpent, his fingers still wrapped around the hilt of the sacred Kusanagi. The storm had passed, but he was not finished. With steady hands, he reached up, his fingers brushing against the comb hidden in his hair. The strands stirred beneath his touch as his divine energy flickered through them. And then gently he pulled. Kushinadaheim's form shimmered back into existence, her eyes wide with disbelief, her breath catching as she returned to herself. For a moment, she simply stood there, unsteady, disoriented. Then she looked past Susanoo, past the gruesome battlefield, past the lifeless horror that had once been her unchangeable fate. The monster was gone. The sacrifice was over. Her lips parted, a whisper of disbelief escaping them. "You did it." Her parents were upon her in an instant, their cries of joyous relief breaking through the silence. Their hands gripped her as though they feared she might vanish once more. They had lived in the shadow of death for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to hope. But now their daughter was alive, and for the first time in 8 long years the village would not mourn. Susanoo watched them in silence. He had kept his promise. But a promise fulfilled did not mean a purpose completed. His eyes drifted once more to the sacred blade in his hands. He had come to this land with nothing. No home, no throne, no place among gods or men. Yet now he held something far greater than just a victory. He held a legend, and legends, he was beginning to understand, were not meant to stay hidden in the mortal world. The wind stirred around him, whispering in his ears, carrying with it the weight of his past crimes and the pull of a future he had not yet considered. The chaotic storm inside him had not yet settled, but it was no longer just a storm of rage. It was now a storm of purpose. His exile had begun with a shameful act of chaos, but just perhaps it would not end with one. The wind carried whispers of his name, the god who had fallen, the god who had slain the great serpent, the god who now held a blade forged by fate itself. But Susanoo did not stay to hear the whispers of men. He did not remain among the mortals who now looked upon him with a newfound reverence, nor did he bask in the gratitude of those he had saved. His path was not yet complete. For the first time since he had been cast from the heavens, his eyes turned upward, to Takamagara, to the home that had forsaken him, to the gods who had feared his wrath, and to the sister he had so grievously wronged. The storm was returning to the heavens. His ascent was not quiet. As he moved through the divine realm, the air grew thick with unease. The gods of the celestial plane had not forgotten his rage. They had not forgotten the destruction he had once brought to their sacred halls. And as he walked toward the great gates, the gods gathered, not to welcome him, but to stop him. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, stepped forward. She was as radiant as ever, her presence filling the air with a brilliant, golden light. But there was no warmth in her gaze, no joy in seeing her wayward brother return. There was only a weary, guarded caution. "You dare return?" Her voice was steady, but there was a core of steel beneath it. Susanoo met her gaze without flinching. "I have not come to bring ruin," he said, his voice calm, no longer the bellow of a petulant storm, but the deep rumble of a measured thunder. The tension in the air did not ease. The gods behind her shifted, waiting, watching, their hands hovering over their weapons, their divine energies crackling. "You expect me to believe that?" she asked, her voice laced with the memory of a desecrated hall and a dead handmaiden. Susanoo did not answer with words. He reached to his side, where the Kusanagi no Tsurugi gleamed against his hip. And then, slowly, reverently, he unsheathed it. A gasp rippled through the assembled gods. Not in fear, but in recognition. This was no ordinary blade. It shimmered with a light that was not of Asgard, a power that was ancient and pure. The blade reflected the golden light of the sun goddess, its own brilliance rivaling her own. "I bring you this," Susanoo said, his voice calm and clear. He held it out to her, not as a trophy, not as a demand, but as an offering, as proof. "I was cast down," he continued, "and I accepted my exile, but exile did not break me. It did not make me lesser. Made me more. I slew the beast that no man or god on this plane dared to face. I ended a curse that had ruled a land for centuries. I took from its body a weapon that was never meant to be found. And now I offer it to you, Amaterasu, for the heavens, for the peace I once shattered." The silence was absolute. Amaterasu studied him for a long, long time. The brother she had once cast away, the storm that had once shaken her kingdom. But the god who stood before her was no longer the reckless, weeping god of tempests. He was no longer the wild, destructive force that had known only chaos. This was a warrior. This was a god reborn. Slowly, she stepped forward. And then, before all the gods of Takamagara, she accepted the sacred blade from his hand. The gods did not speak. They did not move, for they all understood what had just happened. The storm had not returned to destroy. It had returned to atone. And in doing so, it had become a legend. But Susanoo was not meant to remain among the clouds. There was still a place waiting for him, a final purpose. Izanagi, his great father, the creator of all, emerged from the divine halls, his expression unreadable. But when he spoke, there was no anger in his voice, no condemnation. There was only a final, fitting task. "You are not the same God who left these halls," Izanagi said. "And so you shall not remain here. You have proven you can conquer chaos. Now you must learn to rule it." Susanoo did not protest. He had expected as much. But the next words surprised him. "You will go to Yomi," Izanagi decreed, "to the land of the dead, the realm of your mother. You will stand as its guardian, as its ruler, as its protector, not as a punishment, but as your purpose. You, who were born of my grief for the underworld, will now become its master." A final, silent understanding passed between father and son. And then Susanoo bowed his head. He had been cast down from heaven once before in disgrace. But this time he chose to descend. And so, the tale of Susanoo comes to its strange and fitting conclusion. He is a god of profound contradictions, a being of destructive, chaotic power who ultimately becomes a force for order and protection. A god banished from heaven who finds his true purpose not in the light, but in the darkness. His story is not a simple one of a villain who becomes a hero. It is a story of maturation, a tale of a wild, untamed force of nature learning to control itself, to find a purpose beyond its own immediate, emotional impulses. He had to be cast out, to be humbled, to be stripped of everything, before he could truly understand his own strength. He had to face a monster far more destructive than himself before he could learn to tame the monster within. He slew the Yamato no Orochi not just to save a maiden, but to save himself. And in that act, he transformed from a petulant storm into a guardian. His final descent into Yomi was not a second banishment, but an acceptance of his true nature. He, the god of the violent sea and the raging storm, found his final, fitting home as the silent, watchful king of the land of shadows and the dead. His legend serves as a powerful reminder that even the most chaotic and destructive forces can find a path to redemption, and that true heroism is often found not in the glorious halls of heaven, but in the lonely, thankless task of standing guard against the darkness. Sometimes a god must fall to earth to learn what it means to be divine. And sometimes, the only way to atone for shattering the peace is to become the guardian of the great, final silence. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the storms of Japanese mythology. If this unveiling of a tempestuous god has captivated you, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to Mythos Unveiled, and hitting the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the heart of our most complex legends. Which chaotic god from another mythology do you believe also has a hidden heroic side? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, remember that even the most destructive storm can, in the end, bring a cleansing rain.